I think it's difficult to learn there is about the world of web development. But at some point, we'll be on our own. We'll need to learn some new technologies and techniques. So instead of focusing directly on getting everything that we could ever get all at once, let's make ourselves ready to be independent and be able to figure out new techniques and technologies on our own. This way, we can thrive in whatever the web development world becomes. So let's go back to the very beginning. Some of us may recognize this. This is Netscape Navigator, and in fact, it was the first major web browser, which was peaked in popularity in the 90s. It was released in 1994, and it was based on the earlier Mosaic web browser, which was developed by Mark Andreessen at the University of Illinois back in 1993. And then Microsoft Internet Explorer came on to dominate the web browser's landscape. Development on Netscape Navigator stopped, but we can still find its features in code in the older versions of Internet Explorer and Mozilla Firefox. In fact, if we notice Netscape Navigator, it looks pretty similar to the modern web browsers which we are still using today. There is a URL bar on top and a big viewpoint to display the content here. Nowadays, web developers use three different languages to develop a website, like HTML, which stands for Hypertext Markup Language, CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheet, and JavaScript. In short, HTML describes the content and structures of a website, CSS describes its styling and presentation, and of course, JavaScript handles all the interactions of that website. So, we'll be learning all these three languages in our upcoming videos. However, this situation working with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript hasn't always been the case. In fact, earlier websites were almost entirely text documents with a couple of images, maybe, kind of like newspapers. So, this shows that earlier web browsers used to support HTML only. At that time, CSS and JavaScript did not exist yet. So, this is the first website. Actually, the web wasn't originally designed for big applications like Facebook and YouTube. It was developed as a way for text documents to link one another. As we can see all of the link here on this page, these links were nothing more than a referencing to other pages. And this was the first homepage of Microsoft, which over time the developers started adding styles to their content, like changing colors, fonts, a little bit of layout. And all these changes ended up in pure HTML with a huge mess in code. And then CSS came on the scene around 1996 as the developers wanted to add more and more styles to their pages. With CSS, developers could then separate the styles, like deciding how all the elements will look from its content. And of course, that's just HTML and CSS. And there is JavaScript. JavaScript by itself is a different beast altogether. While HTML and CSS are markup languages, and that's to say that they're only used to describe other documents. In the other hand, JavaScript is a full on programming language. It allows developers to change the content and the style of a live website. JavaScript has had an interesting history. It was developed in 1995 by a guy named Brandon Ike, and he did it in 10 days. Unbelievable. We may not know much about programming now, or maybe we do, but in either way, that's an impressive feat. He created JavaScript to run in Netscape Navigator, but today JavaScript runs in every browser, and it is one of the most popular programming language. Thanks to the popularity of the web, JavaScript runs in a huge number of environments outside the browser, including servers with software like Node.js and Tesla IO. And speaking of popularity, it is easy to assume that JavaScript is an offshoot of the programming language Java because of their similar names. Java was hugely popular in 1995, and in fact, it still is today. Java and JavaScript are in no way related. I mean, there are a couple of syntax similarities, but it doesn't change the fact that the name JavaScript was basically just a marketing decision to piggyback on Java's popularity. A true story.